Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited that you're here for Core 90 training with the community, part of eXp Realty. And we are so pleased about today's call because one of the oldest sayings in real estate is if you're ever going to have a party, invite a lender and an appraiser. And so we're doing that today. We're partying hard. It's going to be great. For those of you who are just tuning in, we're part of our 8-part series called The Anatomy of a Transaction. And today we're talking about appraisals. So we're going to go deep, right? We're going to learn both high level. What is it? What are we doing? What's this process? How does this work? And then digging in. What are the pro tips? What is the stuff that, by the way, a lender and an appraiser wish that you knew so you'd stop screwing up deals, right? Like we all want to know this stuff. I'm going to be taking notes feverishly over here. And we have one of our very top leaders, John Sellers, a huge national leader with eXp, on the call today to run things. John, how you doing today, my man? It's good to see you.
All right, thanks, buddy. Thanks, Jeff.
You
So,
bet.
hey, guys, I am excited to be here today, and I'm excited for you guys, right? Because what I've learned over the years is that the more we can learn the details of the process, how does an appraisal really work? That when we're meeting with our buyers and our sellers, we are an expert. We aren't just salespeople, we're actually experts. So I want to introduce the two folks we got here today. Dave Heidegger has been a friend of mine for a long time now, appraiser here locally. He's been in the business for, he's been an appraiser for 20 years now. His joke is when people ask him how long you've been an appraiser at the house, he usually says about 3 weeks, just to get people nervous. But he's been doing appraisals forever, owns his own company now. So he's going to get into it. And then my other buddy, Brian Case, is a lender here in town in Southern Oregon. Brian's been at the lending business for 25 years. We're talking one of the largest teams in North America, has done as many as 560 loans in a year. And so Brian's going to talk about the loan process from the lender perspective. What actually happens once your client comes in and those pieces. And then Dave's going to come back and talk about really once he gets that appraisal, what does he actually do? Like, what are the things that appraisers are actually doing? And then we're going to have some chances to go ahead and answer some questions and ask some questions. So, Brian, I'm going to let you lead off, my friend, and really talk about this whole process from the lender point of view. And if it's okay, I may add in and ask you a few questions and a few things along the way if I think there might be some.
Absolutely.
Is that right?
Absolutely. Hey,
all right.
Well, can I get that music track? Because I want to start every day with that music, man. That just puts you in a great mood no matter where you're at. So
absolutely.
Great way to kick it off. So as John said, my name is Brian Case. I'm based out of Medford, Oregon. Worked for Guild Mortgage. I've been in the industry 28 years, going on 28 years.
He's getting old. He forgot how long, because when I texted him an hour ago, he said 25. So what happened?
Yeah. Getting old is not for wimps. But so anyway, hey, I just want to thank you for having me on today. So just starting from the beginning of what happens in a loan, when do we order the appraisal? It starts, obviously, hopefully your lender does a good job first of doing all the due diligence to get a pre-approval done before they're out making an offer on that loan, on that house. So assuming they've already vetted the borrower, they've gotten the income and asset documentation and have it already approved, once that contract comes in, that's when things start kicking into gear towards the closing. Okay, so we get a contract in. We can't immediately order an appraisal. A lot of people say, hey, I want that appraisal ordered the minute we get you that contract. Legally, we can't do that. So when we get an appraisal in, a contract in, we then turn it live, right? We plug in the address. We got to call the borrower, talk about locking in terms of that loan, locking in their interest rate, making sure the loan amount's where they want it. Then we have to do what's called upfront disclosures. We have to have disclosures out within 3 days of getting that contract. So once disclosures go out, we have to disclose the terms of the loan to the borrower in writing. They have to sign a notice of intent to proceed before we can order the appraisal. We can't order that appraisal till we have those disclosures back. Now, good thing is with DocuSign, that can happen pretty quickly. But sometimes borrowers will just sit on it. We have to call them like, you want us to, you've got a short close. You need to sign those so we can get that appraisal ordered. We also collect credit card information at that time to pay for that appraisal. Now, we don't charge it at the time that we get their credit card information. We only get that, we'll collect it at closing. The only time we'll collect it on their credit card is if something happens and they have us order the appraisal. The appraiser's done their job. They still need to get paid regardless whether that deal goes through or not.
Where'd we go?
I think we lost him, John. He'll come back. We'll cut this out of the final recording, though, everyone. Don't worry.
So, Dave, as we talk about this, I'm going to just kind of add Dave into the middle of this. So, Dave, I know once Brian orders that appraisal, he can't just send it over to you directly, can he? Where does that appraisal, how does that process work from there? Where his company sends it to who?
Sorry, not sure what happened there, John.
Oh, where is he at? There he is. Okay.
Sorry, I don't know.
I don't know either, but so we were at the point where you were talking about the they've signed all the disclosures, you've collected the credit card information.
Yes.
Okay, from there.
And then we'll turn that over to the processor. Then the processor does what are called the order outs. They do fraud guard, which is something we have to do to make sure that we have a legitimate buyer and there's no outstanding issues against them. Then we have to order the appraisal through a third party. Part of the Frank Dodd Act that happened after the 2008 crash is they no longer let me just call Dave up and say, which I used to love to do, hey, Dave, I need a rush on this appraisal. Can you help me out? And he would rush over and do an appraisal for me. Well, they don't let me and Dave talk really anymore. So they put up a barrier where we have to go through a third party called an AMC, an appraisal management company. Now, I can't dictate which appraiser goes to which property, but I can control who's on my appraiser panel. So I've got several appraisers that I'm like, hey, those people will never set foot on a property that I'm involved with if I can help it. But we have good appraisers like Dave and other people that are in our pool. And so then the appraisal management company then puts that out to bid for the appraisers to see who can do it the fastest and with a decent price for that appraisal.
Hey, Brian. So let's step back. So when you guys do that automated approval,
yeah,
when does it? Sometimes they come back and they say they don't need an appraisal.
Exactly. There is.
When does that happen? Why does that happen?
Well, it's called a PIW, Property Inspection Waiver. And when we get those, it's cool because then we can call the borrower and go, hey, would you like to use this property inspection waiver, which means we don't have to do an appraisal on this property. Sometimes even with the property inspection waiver, the borrower still wants to do an appraisal, probably just to make sure that the value is there, because if it comes in low, maybe they can renegotiate or there's a reason they may want to. I would say about 90% of people do the property inspection waiver. That usually happens when you're at an 85% or lower loan to value. You've got a strong borrower, and most importantly, Fannie or Freddie already has data on that property. They changed, and Dave can probably speak more to this, but I think it was about 6 years ago, Dave, they changed the format of the appraisals and everyone was uploaded into a database at Fannie and Freddie. And so they might already have data on that property. So those are pretty sweet when we get those because it can move things along very quickly and there's no cost to the borrower for that. So then, oh, John, you're on mute.
Of course, the guy's coming to mow my yard right now. So the next step you were talking about, so it goes out to the AMC.
Correct. And then Dave does his job. Then when the appraisal comes back, then we get a copy of it right away, but that doesn't mean we're good to go, right? That it still has to go to an underwriter, and the underwriter has to review that appraisal for condition, make sure there's no red flags that jump out at them. And then once the appraisal signs off, then we can send a copy out to the parties involved.
And who can you legally send that to, Brian?
I can send that to the borrower, and then with their permission, I can send it to the borrower's agent.
Okay. And who actually owns that appraisal?
Guild actually owns that appraisal.
That's what I thought, even though the other person pays for it, but theoretically they haven't paid for it till closing yet. So technically. Yeah.
And if they try to take that appraisal to somebody else to use that appraisal, well, they have to get us to sign off on an authorization of release before they can use that with any other party.
Okay. And what we'll talk about is, so if something comes in low, right? So let's just say it comes in low, and maybe we want to talk about this afterwards, but if something comes in low, the appraisal comes in low and people don't agree with that, what is the process at that point?
Well, John, that just changed actually as of this month. There's a new, what they call an ROV, reconsideration of value. In the old days, I would just reach out to the selling or to the buyer's agent and say, hey, it came in low. Do you want to challenge this? Sometimes they don't, right? Because they'll use it as a negotiation tool. Otherwise, if they do want to challenge it, they have to give us 3 bracketed comparables that they feel better suit that property and that were not included in the original appraisal. And then we send that into the AMC. The AMC reaches out to the appraiser with that additional information to see if maybe they might have missed the sale in the neighborhood. maybe it was a FSBO. There's several reasons why that might change value. Or the appraiser comes back and explains why those comps are not comparable and sticks with the original value. As of this month, however, there were some lawsuits against a very well-known lender that I'm not going to name names, but they got sued for $25 million because of bias in an appraisal. Now, so if on a reconsideration of value now, there's actually a disclosure that we have to send out up front with the upfront disclosures that tells people they have a right to ask for reconsideration of value on their appraisal due to several factors, the biggest being a bias in an appraisal. And so we send that disclosure out up front. Another one goes out when we deliver the appraisal, explaining in the process. It now has to come from the borrower directly. We have a service level agreement that we have to reply to that within X amount of time. The borrower needs to give us some comparables. And again, we send that to the appraiser. There's per word scripting that we have to use because we can't look like we're dissuading them from doing a reconsideration of value, even though we have to say, hey, if you challenge this, it could delay your closing. We have to say it with exact scripting to make sure that we're not seen as discouraging them from doing a reconsideration of value.
So a realtor's piece in that, obviously the buyer's not going to have the comps. So that's where the realtor is going to get involved, and probably the borrower is going to show them the appraisal to see the comps. At that point, they're going to look at it together. And then realistically, the realtor would be providing those comps for them to do that, right? Even though the realtor can't be having, I mean, I suppose they can have conversations with you, but ultimately that letter with those comps have to come from the borrower.
Correct.
So in the past, Brian, I know a lot of appraisals really don't come in low, but out of every 10 that come in low because I know you've done a lot of loans through the years. So out of every 10 that comes in low and they fight them, how many of them actually get correct that they were low and the appraiser adjusted?
Man, I don't know the stats specifically on that, John. I knew that we have been successful in challenging some. One thing that's, I think everybody's pet peeve is when an appraiser comes in $2,000 or $3,000 light on a $350,000 house, right? It's like, you're not that good to that short. So I think most appraisers, if it's there, they're going to try to give it to you. If it's not there, again, if they've missed information and what I've found is the appraisers on our panel don't have an ego. I mean, they want to do a good job. So if they've missed some information, they'll come along and they'll make some adjustments. A lot of times, John, we end up getting comps from realtors that are already on the appraisal. So it's like, look at your appraisal. Make sure you're not giving comps that are already used. He's already seen that. So give him information he doesn't have already.
I love that, guys, because part of being a realtor is actually, half the job is just showing up. They say that for anything. And then showing up with awareness. Right? We've all seen that, the awareness. They're fighting something they don't even know, right? They're not even looking at it, right? They didn't even read it, right? So, and that just makes everybody look bad. Lenders laugh, like, oh, great, another realtor that doesn't know what they're doing, right? So I think I honor you guys again for being here today, because it's just giving you something, I always like to say it's just like another, arrow in your quiver of knowledge, of experience, of value. And again, there's a lot of agents, I always joke, like, they've been in the business for 20 years, but it's like they've been doing the same thing for 20 years. They really haven't learned. Versus I've seen agents that have been in the business 2 or 3 years, and the amount of deals they've done and the expertise and the knowledge they're willing to learn makes them much more valuable to the marketplace and experience-wise than a 20-year vet. So, for you that are on the call that are newer agents, don't be intimidated because somebody's been in the business 20 years. That doesn't mean they know that much.
Yeah. And maybe
you can learn a lot in a very short amount of time if you're willing to be diligent, you're willing to ask questions, those sorts of things. So I encourage you, and that's why I keep saying education is so valuable in the process.
And John, one of the things that we see a lot is realtors will go out and they'll look at a comp and then they'll extrapolate out the price per square foot. And then they'll take something else and go, okay, well, it's this much per square foot in this neighborhood. And then they'll times that by the square footage of this comp they want to use and think that that's what the value should be. And maybe Dave can talk to that by why square footage is not the same in each comparable.
Yeah.
From here, Brian, I think that's great. So thank you. We're going to come back to you on a lot of this, but Dave, I'd like you to go ahead and take it from here. So it's out at the AMC. What happens from here?
Hey, John. Yeah, thanks for having me today. So I'm the dreaded appraiser that can make or break your deal. Not really, but we will be on a lot of different lenders' panels, and so Brian shared that a lot of times the appraisal comes through an appraisal management company. It could come directly from a bank, but that's much more rare. They'll have a separate department that's ordering appraisals. Most banks are using appraisal management companies. So I'll get the order sent to me, and I'll either accept it or not. And if I don't, then it might move on to somebody else. So let's say I accept the appraisal. It'll have some guidelines that I need to follow. It'll tell me if it's a conventional appraisal or an FHA appraisal, a drive-by. That's called a 2055 drive-by appraisal, which happens sometimes, or a land appraisal or a multifamily appraisal, however it's going to come in. And so I'll accept the appraisal. On it, it'll state who I should contact to inspect the property. There'll be a fee on it, which is going to be less than what your borrower is being charged, because the middleman will take a cut, just so you know that. And I'm not at liberty to share what I get paid to the borrower. Most AMCs don't want me to share that information, so I don't. The AMC will give me a due date that I'll accept, that it needs to be back in the office by this particular time. So then I call the contact, which usually is the selling agent, but sometimes it's the listing agent. Or if it's I can do refis also, so it's the borrower that I would call and arrange to go out and do my inspection. And so I'll set a time, we'll head out. Takes about half hour to 40 minutes to do an inspection. On a conventional loan, I'll measure the house. I'll take pictures of all four corners of the house and every room inside. Generally take a picture of the water heater, the smoke detector. FHA appraisal, I'll stick my head in the attic in the crawl space and take a picture of that also, because they don't trust us anymore to say that we looked at it. We have to take a picture of everything. And then write down all the amenities of the house. Ask the homeowner any improvements they've done in the last so many years. If it's a rural property, I'll ask them some questions about wells and septics, and if they have irrigation rights, and if they have natural gas or a propane tank. Or if there's anything unique about the property, I'll ask if there's somebody there. Sometimes
Hey, Dave, so do you do any homework before you go out and do that inspection typically, or is it kind of like, okay, that's where you start?
I will pull the MLS sheet and also the listing history and county information before I go out for sure. Sometimes I'll pull the county drawing. If it's a long way from my office, I will hunt for comps ahead of time, because while I'm out there, I'm going to drive by and take pictures of the comparable sales. If it's in town, I generally don't pull comps ahead of time. So a lot of times when I show up, I honestly have not even looked into value or comparable sales yet. I know about the house, but not about comps. But if it's like
So
in
now
pass, I'll have pulled comps ahead of time.
Yeah, I get that. So now let's just say that you're meeting with the listing agent, and the listing agent feels that do they provide comps to you? How do you feel about that? Is there an advantage to them? I mean, because one thing I heard you say is like, if the homeowner's there, you're going to say, what improvements have you done? Is that valuable for you to have a list of the updates that have been done to the house?
Absolutely. Sometimes they'll type it all up and hand it to me, which is great, or just tell me. The more information I have, the better. I'm not intimidated by an agent giving me even the comps that they use to set the price. I'm interested in that. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm going to look at their comps and say these are the best comps. I'm still going to do my job, but I'll take all the information that you want to give me. In fact, I find it kind of odd that appraiser would be offended or wouldn't want that, but I've heard stories that some are. that doesn't make any sense to me. So I have no issue with an agent meeting me there and handing me comps, or an agent not doing that, or emailing me something. I'm still going to be unbiased and do my job. It's just more information that I have.
And Dave, when you get to that point of the end, when you've got $2,000 or $3,000, or let's say it's a total fixture in a neighborhood, right? So having that whole list helps you in justifying that price, but it also is information you provide to the bank for when they're reviewing that appraisal as well. Is that part of it as well? Like, this one does have granite, this one, it's only a year old. Those things all help when you're actually, because the bank's going to review the appraisal as well, and you've got to justify your number, right?
That's right. That's right. And so over the years, you learn what to put in an appraisal, how much information, and how, back in the day, I would see some appraisals that were just these bare bones, hardly any information. And then I've also run across appraisals that put pages and pages of useless dialogue in the appraisal. There's kind of a sweet spot where you put the information that Fannie Mae and the bank need and want. And so you have to justify your adjustment. So in the sales comparison approach that most people are familiar with, where we compare the subject property to 5 or 6 other houses that have sold recently that we think are the most similar. They're not exactly the same. And so there's some differences. And so maybe one's bigger, one's smaller, one has a bigger lot, one has a pool. We have to make adjustments for those things, and we have to make adjustments based on data, not on just what we come up with.
Well, I kind of took you out of loop, Dave. So let's go back to, so you're at the house, you've done the inspection. What's the next step you do from there?
So then you head back to the office, and you start pulling information. And in the appraisal process, we need to determine if the market is stable or increasing or decreasing. That's one of the things we need to determine. We need to determine the highs and lows in the neighborhood, and there's some general information that we come up with. The biggest part of the appraisal, we determine usually two different approaches to value: the cost approach, where we determine what it costs to buy the site and build the house and depreciate it, and then also the sales comparison approach. And so we pull all that data. I'm searching to see what I think are the best comps available that are most similar to the property I'm looking at, that have sold, that are the closest, that are the most recent. And then we put them on the grid, and we make market-based adjustments. And we come up, we look at all this data, and I come up with what I call my opinion of market value based on all that data. And that is an appraisal, is the actual opinion of market value.
So are there standard adjustments, Dave? For example, you're looking at a house and there's 2 houses in a neighborhood, and they're very similar square footage, within reason, similar condition, but one has a 3-car and one car has a 2-car. Is there a standard adjustment that's all appraisers know, or is there flexibility within that?
We have a secret cheat sheet with all the numbers on it. Just kidding. We don't have that. There is no standard number because in every market, it may be a different amount of money that an extra garage stall brings. And the analogy, or the example I like to use, is in-ground swimming pools. In Phoenix, Arizona, where you're from, John, they might be worth close to 100% of what it costs to put a pool in, because it might be a standard thing that a house has to have a pool. I don't know. I'm not in the Phoenix market, but I would assume they're worth a lot because it's so hot there. Portland, I think in-ground swimming pool brings no additional value to a house, just because it rains so much. And they may even bring a negative because you have to take care of the pool. So in Medford, it's kind of in the middle. A swimming pool brings additional value, and through research, we found it may bring an extra 10,000. Maybe a really nice pool could bring more than that, 15 or 20 if it's a super high-end pool. But it doesn't bring full value. So as far as coming up with these adjustment amounts, I have some software that I use, Solomon Adjust software, and so that one helps me come up with some of the adjustments for like a extra garage stall and things like that. And it changes based on the quality of the house. So if you have a really high-end home, a garage stall will be worth more than on a really entry-level house.
Okay.
things like that. So yeah, I use some software that helps, but the biggest method that appraisers are supposed to be using is called paired sales analysis, where we'll find two houses that are very similar. One has a 2-car garage and one has a 3-car garage, and the one with the 3-car sold for $8,000 more than the one with 2. Oh, so we can attribute that extra $8,000 to the garage. That's called a paired sales. And so we try to find those also.
Okay. Now we got a couple questions, and I'm going to ask you as we keep going here. One is, does days on market affect the value at all to you?
No, it doesn't affect value, because it informs us of what's going on in the market. But you mean as far as like if the average days on market's 90 days and the subject's been on the market for 200 days, then
Or the opposite, right? It's been on the average days are 90 and it sold with multiple offers in 2 days.
right. And sometimes we run into that with comparable sales, and we look at that and go, wow, maybe that one undersold. And that's why one of the reasons you don't value a property based on one sale, because you may have one anomaly of a way underpriced house, and then you could also have one that sold for more the next door neighbor bought it because they really wanted that house and they overpaid for it. But when you get like 6 comparable sales, you can kind of average it out and see where you think it should fall in that range.
So when
So
you do
days
this,
on market does matter, but not to necessarily change value.
excellent. So when we're looking at the appraisal now, how many comps do you have to have? And then I know you guys have supporting comps as well. Could you walk through that?
Fannie Mae lenders usually require at least 3 closed sales and either 1 or 2 pendings or listings. So I will generally have 6 comparable sales, sometimes 7, once in a while 5. That's probably the limited, the smallest amount. Sometimes I'll only have 1 listing because there just aren't any out there. FHA asks for 2 listings. It's actually one of their guidelines, but during COVID and when there was no listings out there, they loosened up on that. But yeah, generally it's 6 comparable sales, 4 closed and 2 listings.
And what about distance, Dave? Like how close to those, how close do those properties have to be, and how do you, and I know sometimes I've had deals where you've had to go 4 or 5 miles. I know so what's the standard, and then why would you expand, and what's allowable?
Yeah. So, sometimes people say there's no comparable sales, and I'm like, there might be no good comparable sales, but there's always comparable sales in the sense of you go further out in time and you go further out in distance. If you have to. So you would love to find 3 sales that are like within 50 yards of the subject with the exact square footage, the same age, same site size, everything, but that never happens. So the more unique the property is, the further out you have to go. As far as lending guidelines, they would like that comps within 6 months. They allow up to a year. And I say allow, I've used comps over a year on some high-end properties, and I explain why I've done that. But they generally would want at least 2 comparable sales that have sold more recently. So on a property in town, generally within a mile is the range that for urban or suburban, sometimes up to 2 miles, and back 12 months would be the range on that.
Now let's just say it is a higher end property that's, you can't, these comps are a year old. Do you make market adjustments based upon, so let's say the COVID year, right? Prices were going up 20%, I know when I'm doing comps, I'm looking at what's the market doing like this, and then today we know that the last year, maybe the prices come down a little bit. Do you adjust that into your appraisal? Are you allowed that flexibility?
Yes, we do, and we're supposed to. That's one of the reasons that we have to determine what the market's doing, and not just the market in general, but let's say the specific market. Maybe I'm doing a manufactured home out in Eagle Point, so I'm going to look at all the manufactured homes within so many 5 or 10 miles, determine has the market been stable or has it been increasing for manufactured homes? And then once let's say I've determined that it's increasing, then I have to determine how much, like, per month. And so to come up with an adjustment. So if I have a sale that sold 8 months or was in contract 8 months ago, and I determined it's increasing 0.25% per month, then I'm going to give it a 2% positive adjustment, a time adjustment. And we go from contract date because that's when the price was determined. And if it was 0.5% per month, then it would have been 4% adjustment. And the same thing if we're going the other direction. We'll do a negative adjustment if the market has been going down, which happened in the past, and we have to justify that. But yeah, if the market's not stable, then we're required to make those kind of adjustments.
A lot of people say when they're doing comps, they just say, "Oh, it's." I mean, I know in the past, like, people want to say, "Well, we don't use price per square foot." And I know when I was in Arizona, where everything's tract homes,
right?
It sure seemed like it was price per square foot, other than condition, right? So you started with a price. I know appraisers didn't, but I saw the results turned out is you started with a price per square foot, and then you adjust. And I'm not saying you did, but as an agent, we adjusted based upon condition at that point because it was so generic, right? Then when I lived in Seattle, I sold real estate. No house was the same, and the neighborhoods had 58 years in variance in the age of home. So I found like their square footage didn't seem to matter as much, like, because condition and age, all those things factored. So how do you take into consideration square footage and price per square foot? And
I mean, price per square foot is a real thing. I think my opinion is that agents lean on it a little too heavily, because, like you said, if the properties are really homogeneous, like in Phoenix, Arizona, or in a 1,200 square foot house in certain neighborhoods in Medford, it may be pretty accurate. You can just take a search and look at that number and kind of get a good idea. But the less similar the properties are, like you said, the less it works. So what I tell people, agents, is that you have to get a pool of very similar properties to make that work. And when it doesn't work, and I'll have agents, come back on an appraisal. You were talking about a reconsideration of value, and they'll use a property that's 1,000 square foot bigger than the one that I'm looking at, and use the price per square foot on that one, or 1,000 square feet smaller. Because usually, as a house gets bigger, the price per square foot will go down. So it doesn't work. You need to compare a 3,000 square foot house to houses that are similar in size. And so, like you brought up Seattle. Well, Ashland's like that, where you'll have a house, 2,000 square foot house on the high side of Ashland that hasn't been remodeled, that sells for $450 or whatever, and then you'll have the same house, like the same floor plan or very similar, but they've put $250,000 of upgrades into it, and it's a $750,000 or $800,000 house. Same, it looks on the county very similar, so that doesn't work at all. When you have that kind of a situation. And so as appraisers, we'll look at it, but it's not a way to challenge our appraisal. So I sometimes you were talking about reconsiderations of value, and I'll get a reconsideration from the borrower, and it's usually from the borrower's agents or the ones who help put it together. And it's all based on price per square foot. And that it's like we're not equipped to use that necessarily. That isn't how you challenge an appraisal. Brian was talking about the reconsideration of value, and on our end, the changes that Fannie Mae did don't really affect us very much. It still comes in on a form that we have to respond to, which is I think it's a great thing that the borrower has recourse. And I'm always open to look at some new information. I don't love it because it makes more work for my job, because I have to go through this stuff and respond to it. But I like that they have that, and I'm not arrogant enough to think I know everything and that my values are perfect. So I will look at the information, and it can be additional comparable sales that I missed or that they think are better than the ones I used, or it can be other information that maybe I didn't know about one of my comps I used. Maybe it was distressed, or the foundation was about to fall down, and I didn't know this information, or I made a mistake. Sometimes If there's a real mistake I've made on the appraisal, which doesn't, I don't make very many, but uh, they bring that up, or there's different things that could be brought up to challenge my appraisal. The one thing I would say is that it has to be a material item. Sometimes people will say, well, he said it had a wood stove and it's a fireplace. Well, okay, I screwed up. I said it was a wood stove, or I said it was a fireplace and it's a wood stove. That doesn't really make any difference on value. So it's not something that, yes, sometimes borrowers will be nitpicky on some little things on the appraisal. It has a play structure in the back and they didn't even talk about that. Yeah, okay, it's got a play structure.
Yeah.
But it needs to be something that affects value.
So something you just said there, and I wanted to address it a little bit more, is that you said there's sometimes things that I don't know about the comparables.
Absolutely.
And that's one thing, Dave's appraised a lot of my flips over the years. And, the flips, like, they're so upgraded in a neighborhood. One, they're hard to find comps for, but number two is Dave doesn't actually go inside of every comparable and look at all the details. So, how many times have you seen a listing that says remodel kitchen? So mine's remodeled, that one's remodeled. The pictures aren't that great. It's hard for Dave to tell, right? But he sees it. I'm just not saying you do this, Dave, but I'm saying generally, right? And yet, mine's brand new. And that one might have Formica. This one has granite, right? This one has brand new cabinets. Those weren't really new cabinets. They were just painted.
Right.
Hey, we replumbed the whole house, right? That wasn't replumbed. That's dated, so Dave's not going to know all that stuff about those comps. He's typically, unless there's something glaring, he might call that agent to verify the value, but he's really not calling that other agent to say, could you give me more details on that kitchen?
Yeah.
Most of the time. Where us as agents, so if you have a house and again, I'm talking like Scotty that does a bunch of flips and these guys, like when you've got a house that's overly upgraded and you can look at the comps and know that, like with my stuff, I knew that they weren't going to go to the house next door, right? Because the houses were 50 years old. I would actually I would look at the comps because I did the comps up front, but I actually looked at each one of them. And if I had to call, hey, when was that kitchen done? Maybe I'd been in, and I would actually create a list. Here's all the upgrades on this house. Here's how mine compares to this comp.
Yeah.
Right. So we had this, they don't have this. We have this, they don't have this. They had this, we didn't. And again, a lot of times when I put that together, and Dave's seen those that I've done because I've given them to him, that might take me 2 hours, 3 hours at the most, right? But that idea is that when I know those comps are high, so when you've got a property that is over improved, I don't know if over improved is the right word, but there's been so much done to it, you want to make sure that you provide that kind of information because that's helpful. That's the pieces that he doesn't see, right?
Yeah.
And that's where you're adding value to him, in that situation.
So what you're saying, John, I've done a few years over the years, and you're aware going in that your property's on the top edge of 1,200 square foot houses in that neighborhood because you've really updated it.
Right.
And so you're helping me by giving me some more information because I'm going to struggle on this one, and I appreciate that. And so because contrary to popular belief, we do not like to come in low. It just makes a headache for us, but we have to come in where we feel in our heart that it should be. But we know that coming in low means that, okay, I'm going to get a phone call and I'm going to get a reconsideration of value, and I'm going to have to, it means more work. So there's no incentive for us to come in low. So that first, get that out of your mind, that appraisers don't like to come in low. We want to come in where we think it should be at. And if it happens to be low, and I don't even like the term low, you guys use that term, lower than contract price, but it implies that I screwed up the appraisal because I came in low. I'm trying to come in at what I think market value should be, but I understand the idea of it's below contract. And when a property comes in below contract on the appraisal, we have to address that and kind of talk about maybe why we think that happened a little bit. They usually want a comment or two, but those are the ones that will come back, and I'll have to usually relook at them with some new information. And so, yeah.
So let's go back to that. I mean, this isn't you, Dave, but I'm going to address some things that are out there of agents' opinions of appraisers or their what we found, right? So don't take this, but the idea is like Brian said, there are certain appraisers that I do not allow to be on my list. And one of our people here said, look, there's certain appraisers, like I know in Medford, there's a couple appraisers that always come in low, like always. There's always a challenge, right? So I'm like, okay, if we have a lender, if I've actually had it where on one of my properties, the borrower comes in, I talk to the lender, I'm like, who's on your exclusion list? Because if this person's on your list, I'm not going to accept this deal.
Or they think they're inspectors, home inspectors.
So I guess the question is, so we know that there is we'd like to think it's an exact science, but it's not. There's a general feeling how people feel. Because we know that there's appraisal that a couple years ago that, came in at 230, which was ridiculous on a property. And I tried to work it with the buyer and, we ended up canceling that deal out and it appraised at 255 and got the deal done. Right. And I'm like, okay, same house, the same week. That was almost a 20% a 10% variance there in opinion. So that's why it is an opinion of value. Yeah. And that's why there is this idea that we have the ability to object to it and add value to the appraiser. And number two is, and again, understand there's typically, and somebody there's no incentive for an appraiser to come in low. But the other is, Brian, and I'm going to ask you this, Brian. So on a conventional deal, if the seller doesn't agree with that appraiser, can the buyer pay for another appraisal if the seller's willing to accept that second appraisal?
They don't like you to do that. In the past, we've been able to get around that. That's gotten harder with this new ROV process. So no, we can no longer do that. So we can't just say, no, we're going to cancel an appraisal and order another one. We have to work with the existing appraisal that we have now.
Really?
That's part of the new rule that came out with the reconsideration of value.
Wow, that's good to
like
learn.
To do that to begin with. So, but occasionally you could get around that.
Now let's say, so now obviously if the deal canceled and it was a new borrower, then you get a new appraisal. But that's different with FHA, right, guys?
Yeah,
because the FHA appraisal sticks with the house.
Sticks with the property.
Is that right, Dave?
I defer to Brian on that one.
I didn't know if you knew that as well. So it's 6 months, Brian, isn't it?
Correct. Yeah. So even if you cancel that transaction and somebody else goes to buy it, they'll track it through the FHA case number and they'll say there's already been an appraisal on that property. Then you got to reach out to the other lender, get a release for that to be able to then have that appraisal assigned to you for that 6 month period. So you can't just go get a new appraisal on an FHA.
Now, what about VA, Brian?
VA is the same way. VA actually follows the borrower on that, not the property. So VA, if that canceled, you could go do that. One thing about VA loans is though VA, you can't have an approved panel on that. VA appraisers, that's the only appraisal that we have zero control over who gets it. It goes through the VA, and VA has their approved people, and you can't change it. They decide who gets that.
So we had an interesting question that came through. If let's just say I'm the listing agent and I get a call from this appraiser that I know is historically someone we've had challenges with. If we can refuse to use that appraiser and have a different appraiser. Can we do that or not? I know I've seen that happen in the past where we're not going to work with that person. We need to have another person from the AMC come out. Can you do that?
I've seen that happen before. And we just say, hey, they have a conflict with this agent. There's some bad blood or whatever the case may be, and we need to get it reassigned. Now, if that appraiser's already done some work, they may have to pay him, a small fee for the work that he's already incurred. It doesn't happen often. I think I've only had it happen like probably 4 times in my 28 years.
Right. So, but the key would be to do that before they come and do a property inspection. As soon as the conversation's there. And for listing agents,
question for Brian. What happens? Is there a way to disqualify an appraisal that was just botched? Say it was really deficient. Is there a way that it can be excluded through the lender side?
On conventional, yeah. Conventional, there used to be a way to do that. like I said, with this new ROV process, though, everyone's so worried about getting sued now for this bias in appraisals. Like I said, one lender just got $25 million judgment against them. So they can't do anything to make it appear like they're doing something to circumvent the process or to hide something. So with this new process, you would have to show them where they're deficient. You'd have to show and work with the appraisal management company to get that rectified.
And there's ways to go up the chain of command on that. So I have seen that where one of my agents had that happen, and they went all the way up through the appraisal management company. They went through the, they actually ended up going to the state appraiser, group, and actually got some things adjusted and got a new one done based upon that. But there was an obvious error, right, that the guy wouldn't, and they've had some problems with that appraiser before. So it's typically not going to happen, right? But there is a way to do it if there was a gross deficiency. However, one of the things, Brian, and somebody asked, with a VA, you cannot have any influence on, so if the VA appraiser calls and you don't like that one, you don't have the option to say, I want a different one.
No.
It was a challenge here in Southern Oregon because we had one that was a very challenging VA guy for a long time.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
And we all know who he was.
Yep.
You were never not going to have a reinspection. You always want to have a reinspection no matter what it was. So I learned, like, if I had a VA deal and I was doing a flip, I'd be like, let's leave a couple things for him to find because he's going to find something and we were going to repair it anyways. Let's just let him, if he misses it and we didn't need to repair it, great. But if he does, that gives him something so he doesn't go digging.
Yeah. And the reconsideration process is different on a VA loan. On a VA loan, they invoke what's called tidewater. And that means that the appraisal is coming in low and you have 48 hours to get bracketed comps broken out. They're very specific how they want that information to be provided to them to challenge that appraisal. If you don't get that to them in time, you can't go back after it.
Right. So Dave, as we talk about different types of appraisals, and we're going to get to how you finish the process, but one of the things I want to talk about is that, in a conventional deal, what happens if the roof's bad? I mean, I know on a VA, on an FHA, and on a VA, like that has to be repaired for a closing, but on a conventional, that's different. So how does that work when you see, the paint's peeling, but it's a conventional deal? Do those just come into the value of the property, or do you say this is a condition of the appraisal that this has to be done, or how does that work? Did I ask the question right?
Yeah. So on a conventional loan, we're not under FHA guidelines, but things that come into that would need to be repaired would be something that is a safety issue. Let's say that there's a second-story deck that has no balcony or no railing around it, or an in-ground pool that has no water in it. The lender wants that called out. That's a safety issue.
Or a smoke alarm.
Yeah,
the smoke alarm, or the strap around the hot water heater. Those are our favorites, right?
That has become a thing in the last number of years. Yeah, or if it's a structural thing, and so like a roof that's leaking needs to be called out even on conventional because it has to do with the value of the sustainability of that property, the asset that the bank is going to be lending money on. But sometimes appraisers will call things out that are just cosmetic things, on a conventional loan or even on an FHA loan. They've loosened up on those kind of things. From when I started, we had to call everything out, where now you can have a crack in a window, you can have torn carpet, a small hole in sheetrock. Those are cosmetic issues that don't have to be called out on an FHA appraisal now, but they did in the past. The peeling paint is a issue with lead, and even on newer paint with FHA, they want if there's bare wood, they want it called out, or if it's peeling paint, they want it called out. Roofs. One of the things that people, as an appraiser, I'm not an expert on roofs, so I will defer to a roof inspection. If I think it's like right at that line, like FHA needs to have at least like 3 years of life left in it. I look at it and go, well, it doesn't look like it's leaking. It looks like it'd be okay, but I'm going to call out a roof inspection. And then a roofing company will have to say that it has that amount of life left.
So but on a conventional, if the roof's really bad, and you can tell it's really bad, but it's not leaking, you don't see any water leaks, that's not going to be a called or a conditioned issue.
I think one of the biggest misnomers, I think, between conventional FHA, I've got a lot of realtors that go, well, we better go conventional because it's got some issues. Like Dave said, if it's a health or safety issue, it's going to get called out regardless of if it's conventional or FHA. And as far as roofs is concerned, again, most regulations say, hey, you have to get a roofer's opinion that has at least 2 years left of life on that roof. And that's going to be the same for conventional or FHA.
Oh, okay. So Dave, talk about, I got my real estate license in 1991. So, we're old in the tooth here, but I remember back then, people were like, oh, FHA and VA, they're so difficult. We don't want to do those. And what I found is when a story's created, like when I first started selling real estate, all the buyers wanted to offer 10% less because that's what their grandparents did. Well, that was before there were comps. That was before there was MLS. Like rarely do people offer 10% less typically anymore. So like, the deal was, it was much trickier. What have you seen now? What the difference between the FHA and the conventional? What are the things, like you mentioned, you've got to look underneath the house now. What are some of the things that you have to tag that are different?
I've noticed that FHA will come in waves sometimes, and that probably has to do with the interest rates. And so at some times FHA seems to be the way the lenders are going, and then other times I don't see as many FHA. So some things that are like more concrete that could ruin a deal is there needs to be, if there's like electrical and plumbing or ducting under a house, there has to be enough room to get access to those things, which is approximately 18 inches of crawl space. There's a little bit of gray area in that, like if part of the crawl space there's nothing that needs to be accessed, and it might be a little less. We have some room, but yeah, that's something that's important, and there has to be an access point that somebody can crawl under there. But as far as there's some well and septic distance guidelines for FHA, but there isn't too much different between FHA and conventional as far as what would sink a loan. You may end up.
Let me pull up a couple things I'm thinking. Right. Let me pull up a couple things.
Sure.
So conventional doesn't care if there's peeling paint, if there's bare wood. FHA is going to care, right?
Right.
So if
you got a conventional, them come back on that, but yeah, historically conventional exposed wood. Yeah, you're right. That's something that's going to be on FHA. So sometimes on an FHA property, they may have to paint the whole house, whereas if they went conventional, they might not have to.
And you've got to have a vapor barrier with an FHA, don't you? Versus you don't with the conventional. Is that true or not?
Is that true, Brian?
FHA does want a vapor barrier.
Yeah.
So these sorts of things, right? So like, do you have to have an updated panel, Bri, or can you go with
you can still have the old fuses as long as it appears to be in working order.
So generally, and just kind of give you an idea, when I'm talking to people about FHA versus VA, really what I'm saying is, guys, we need to make sure we have crawl space, right? We need to make sure there's a vapor barrier on there. Number two is we need to make sure that there's, it doesn't matter if your house is painted 10 different colors. It's really a matter of, do we not have any bare wood?
Yeah. I mean, they could throw primer on it, or whatever. It's about the bare wood and the peeling.
The peeling, right? That's a big deal.
3 years of roof life is important.
Yep, 3 years of roof life. So, okay, and we can cover that up front by getting a roofer to give a cert.
Yeah.
Because that is an arbitrary.
Have a heat source that's, but this is for conventional and FHA, you have to have a heating source, not just a wood stove.
Now, how does that work, Dave? Like with, it's interesting because I'm saying each room has to have a heat source, right? So how does that work? Like, does each room have to have it, or how does that lay out?
No, FHA, it's just, I believe it has to keep the house at 58 degrees. Is that right, Brian?
It has to be a system that can adequately supply heat to the entire home and keep it at a certain level. So,
and it's a very low level. I was like, wow, 58 degrees. So, you'll get these houses in West Medford that have just a unit heater in the living room, a gas unit that heats the whole house, or you get a ductless heat pump system.
Which we're going to ductless a lot now for small.
Yeah, they don't have it in every room. So that's fine.
Okay. Okay. So let's keep moving on. So now you're working on your comps. You've bracketed them. You've given ups and downs. And then basically, do you take them together and average them out, or how do you work that out?
Um, we will often weight them. I'll look at the comps, and maybe in the appraisal there'll be a percentage of gross adjustments or net adjustments, and so maybe comp one is only got 2% of adjustments. It's very similar to the subject property, and comp three has 28% adjustments, meaning that it's less similar, and so it had some much bigger square footage, or it's newer. So I'll say I'll look at all the comps and I'll say, well, comp number one, I'm giving 30% weight. Comp number three, I'm giving 18% weight. It has to add up to 100%, but I'll weight them out and I'll come look at what the final number will be based on that. And I'll also take into account the cost approach, which is like I said, where I determine what it would cost to buy the site and to build the property, rebuild it, and depreciate it.
Now I see you guys do that on appraisals, but I've never seen that it seems to be used in a residential situation. I've always thought it's kind of a waste of time, honestly.
Yeah, most appraisers don't. Well, a lot of appraisers run away from it, and FH or VA doesn't require the cost approach. It's up to the appraiser in most situations. For a lot of the appraisals I do, conventional and FHA, the lender will want the cost approach. I like the cost approach. I think it's very helpful for me because it kind of shows me if I'm in the ballpark. It should be close, but you're right. Very often they don't give it much weight in the final opinion. We like to lean on the sales comparison approach because that most accurately represents what's actually happening in the marketplace. And sometimes the cost approach is lagging behind. It's weird. They'll all come in low, but the properties are selling for more than that. And maybe the site values are going to be going up in price, or materials are going up, and we're not reflecting that yet. So the sales comparison approach is the one we hang our hat on for sure.
Okay. So now you've wrapped that up. You've done your comps. You've bracketed them. You've come up with a number. What's the next step?
We clean up the appraisal, make sure it's all the spell checks are done, and then we shoot it off to the AMC. We upload it. They will usually review it, and if they have any issues with it, maybe there's some kind of a mistake, or we used a word we shouldn't have used, like desirable, because that's a bias word, whatever. They'll come back and say, hey, clean this up. Or if they have a question on it, and then it gets sent from the AMC to the lender, and then it gets reviewed again, I believe. And they may have some issues with it, and then we have to respond to those. And then we may get a reconsideration of value. So it goes through several layers of review before it is finished.
Well, I want to come back to that, but Joe's got a question. Joe's our lender guy on the ground, so I'd love to get his opinion.
Lender guy on the ground. I know just enough to be a nuisance. Whereas you got a guy like Brian Case who's as good as anybody, and did more deals than anybody alive. So he's definitely the expert. I did have the lending experience, so it does help to a degree. But one of the things I just wanted to say too is that, well, one, when you talk about what you get paid, back when they changed everything to protect the consumer, appraisals used to be between like $350 and maybe $425 or something like that. And then overnight, to protect the consumer, we got AMCs and they went to $800 and $850. So, thank you for the protection.
Yeah.
But, in addition, sometimes you're getting there toward the end, and what does Dave do right before he turns it in? Once in a while, we're all going to get a call from an appraiser that's saying, hey, you're going to get this voicemail, Joe, can you call me back on 123 Main Street that you just sold? I have a couple questions for you. Return that call quickly. I mean, we're all in this thing together. They need that information. They're trying to put together, they're trying to figure out why this is or isn't a good comp. They're trying to establish value for somebody else. There's going to be a deal a month later that you're the one that you need somebody to return that phone call to explain what it was with that property that they can't see, to help them with that. I just had an appraiser call me the other day on a deal, And she said, okay, what am I missing? And that's the other thing. Once you've been doing it for 100 years and you return these calls promptly and you start to build a little bit of a relationship, it's, there's a little bit of conversation. There's a little bit of give and take. And she calls up and she says, what am I missing here? She goes, it seems like this should be selling for a lot more than that. I go, it should be selling for a lot more than that. I go, it's a distressed sale in the sense that they have a bridge loan that they have to pay off. And if they don't sell this right now, they're going to not be able to start making this payment that they're committed to coming up. And then she goes, okay, that makes total sense. She goes, because I'm seeing it. And then I told her about a comp that I'd sold months earlier. I said, this one's almost the exact same as this that sold for $450. And yet here we are, $35,000 less. But then I did go on to say, listen, though, if you can do me a favor, bring it in the way you're supposed. Now, this is me talking to her, but I said, bring it in the way you're going to bring it in. I said, you're legit on the number that you're coming up with, because I'm going to start getting calls from appraisers down the road that are going to say, hey, why did this sell for this amount? Was there a bunch of deferred maintenance needing a lot of work? Is there functional obsolescence, areas that didn't, they're not useful? Why is it that this didn't come in? And I'm going to be able to explain to them, hey, this was the scenario, but by the way, the appraisal came in at 450, even though we sold it at 415. So we're all, like I said, we're all in this thing together. You need to be able to answer those calls quickly and provide the information to them so that they can, help build this story and then explain to the lender why comp 2 doesn't really, doesn't represent the value of the neighborhood or the value of the area and what have you.
Joe, I want to repeat what you said there, because I think this is really valuable, guys, is that everything that we have is about relationships and influence. And we gain influence when we treat people respectfully, when we add value to them at some point or another, and then that allows us to have influence. And there is no, tit for tat, we'd like to say that's not real. It is, okay? And that how we respond, right? Dave knows that Joe's always returned my calls quickly. If he calls me, and he's a good guy, when he calls me and has a little bit of a challenge on something, Dave's going to be more open to listen than a guy that was a jerk or a gal that was a jerk. It's human nature. I'm not saying Dave's going to change his appraisal based upon that, but he's going to listen more because that's human nature. I've had a lot of appraisers that no different than Joe, when I know something's high, it's going to be on the high side. I've had appraisers call me and just go, hey, John, this looks like it's running a little high. Can you help me how you justified that? I've actually had them call me and say, hey, how did you come up with this number? Because they usually know I didn't pull it out of my hat, because I built credibility over time, right? Like Joe said, he's built credibility. So all these relationships, and I just, everything comes back in life to relationships, right? Like
it does 100%.
Yeah. So it's like, and they start with that first call. They start with that first, how you respect people and doing that call. And that's the same thing with me, Joe. Do I like getting those calls? When I was really busy in the years past and things were going crazy, man, it'd be tiring getting these appraisers calls, right? But it was like, wait a minute. Okay, this call, let's get back quick. I'm building a relationship.
This guy's trying to get something knocked out for somebody else.
Yeah.
So every month I'm sitting there on the other end going, is my appraisal in yet? Is my appraisal in yet? So what if all it's hanging on, the delay, is somebody returning a call to an appraiser to give them the information that's necessary to help them come in at an accurate value? What if that's one of the things? Or what if the actual value itself is going to be impacted by the fact that some lazy realtor won't get back to somebody, but yet they're going to end up bitching down the road on later date about how something didn't come in the way they wanted it to? Again, we got to participate together, and then once you start to build that relationship, I've had a lot of successful, value changes, rebuttals, if you will, where the appraisers has gotten back to me and said, hey, what are you seeing here? Or I see that you're budding this, tell me what you're seeing. And then I can explain to them, it's just like, well, the comps that you use were not actual comps that my buyer would have considered, because of the fact that my buyer needed a minimum of 2 acres for their horse, and my buyer needed this, and my buyer didn't want this influence over here. So for my buyer, and they have to take highest and best use into consideration, everything else. But all of a sudden they go, I can see what you're saying, and then for your buyer, these comparables could be different, so that could potentially impact them. Whereas it's, there's different ways to look at it and get a different opinion. One buyer shop and one buyer. But it all comes down to, again, being involved, learning what you can, but being involved with the appraisers and helping them as much as you can. It's not an adversarial type situation.
Right.
Like it doesn't have to be that way.
And we don't want it to be. Dave, when do you typically call? So I know those calls often when I got them was like, hey, can you verify the sale price sometimes? And like, hey, what were the concessions? That seemed to be always the biggest call, was like, let's verify the concessions. Is that typically what you're calling people about?
Well, we're required to get some verification, but if you post the concessions, then I don't have to call you on that. So it saves just some kind of remedial calls that aren't for important things like what Joe was talking about. What Joe's talking about is where we see it. We have one comp that it might be the most similar one to our subject property, and yet it's like $35,000 lower than all the rest of the comps, which is really frustrating as an appraiser. And so we know something's going on here. Why is this one that's actually, I can't ignore it because it's so similar to my subject, but it doesn't make sense. And so after talking to Joe, I would probably weight that one way low, and I would talk about it, saying this is why it's a good indicator of the lower end of values, but because of this reason, I'm giving it minimal weight. Or at some points, I've said that even in the appraisal, I'm not using a comp because it's right near the subject and similar, but because of this reason, it was distressed. It's not a good indicator of value. And so I'm acknowledging to the underwriters that I knew about this comp, but I'm not using it. And so that information really helps me out to understand why this.
Yeah, that's great, Dave. And I think for us agents, as we're doing CMAs, guys, that's the same thing, right? When you're looking at comps and something doesn't make sense, we need to be calling that agent and saying, for example, I bought a lot of distressed properties. Like that wouldn't be a good comp, right? I bought a commercial building a couple of years ago, and the appraiser's like, yeah, you got such a good deal on that. We don't use that as a comp.
Right.
Because the value just isn't real, right? And of what you paid it for it. So actually, when you're doing a CMA, to actually call those agents, and I do this a lot, I'll look back and say, tell me a little bit about that house. Is there anything that I can't see in the pictures? Or it seems like it sold for over what it should have. Can you help me understand that? Or it sold for under. Can you help me understand that? So we can actually do the same thing. And then that's some of the information we can provide to the appraiser as well in that initial meeting that saves them time again. And that's, again, building a relationship that we talked about, right? That's adding value. It's not just fluff. It's actually adding value, making their job easier. So let's say we're back, Brian.
And I think
go ahead, Dave. Go ahead, Dave.
Oh, I was just going to say that in the past, sometimes listings have been pretty bare bones, but now it seems like agents are putting more information in the listings. So we don't have, because we're not going to call on every comp, but sometimes they'll put information in there that they're going to get a phone call constantly on, and they put it in the listing so they don't have to get that phone call 10 times. And that's appreciated on our side of things.
Yeah, and one of the things, guys, on that is that, so one of the things that I like to do when I'm the listing agent on that is I'm going to say that it's by appointment only once the deal's sold. Because some appraisers they might call the buyer's agent, and then if it's a vacant house, they might just go in because they've got a key box and they're in, and you didn't even get there. And I call most of the lenders and say, look, I want to be the contact point on the listing agent. Number two is I'm going to change my listing to it's appointment only, and that there's no lockbox there. So the appraiser has to call me. Now, if I choose to tell them there's a lockbox and let them go in on their own, I'm going to do that. But I'm going to control that situation. And you can do that. You can just change that. The other thing that Dave's saying is make sure that you do put in what the concessions were in the MLS. Not only helps the appraisers to maybe get less calls, but it helps all of us in terms of figuring out values, right? Joanne, do you have a question?
Hi, thank you. So with this new, buyer agency commission stuff, I think that values are going to be a little wonky because the seller paid $30,000 in buyer's commission or whatever. This one they didn't. So you've got the values that look like this. I just had one like that where the buyer paid my commission as one of their closing costs, not the sellers. And then I put it in the private remarks, attention appraiser, seller did not pay buyer's agent commission. Is that helpful to you? I mean, how are you managing knowing whether, this value here, the seller didn't have to pay something, this value here, the seller did, but they're actually the same exact net value of the house?
Yeah, I haven't encountered that yet where the buyer's agent paid the commission. Pretty much every purchase I've done, the seller is still paying 2 or 2.5%, and I disclose that in the appraisal, but I don't use it as a concession because I say it's typical for the market at this point. That still is the typical way things are done. As far as if the buyer's agent ends up being paid by the buyer, yeah, that will be an issue that we'll have to cross that bridge, and possibly, yeah, it will. We may have to do an adjustment up on that. I'll have to think about that, but when we come to that,
I tried to get my buyer. I said, well, okay, now that we've negotiated, she goes, if they'll take this price, I'll pay you separate. So we negotiated it like that. And then I said, you know what? We could raise the price now and include, the seller would agree to pay my commission and it would come out the same with you, because I thought it would help for comps. And she said, no, I just want I want it to be on my closing cost sheet. I want it to be recorded as me, for whatever tax reasons, if that made a difference, I don't know. But anyway, I just think it would
you were
be
wise to put
time.
that in the listing so that information's out there. So that we know that, so we can see why this one came in a little bit lower than the other ones.
And Dave, you see the private remarks, right? So
yes,
you have the same access as us as realtors do. You're going to see everything in there.
Yeah, just like you guys do.
Okay, so Bri, Joanne, was there anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, thanks. So Bri, now it's back to, so we just talked, guys. So Dave sends it back to the AMC. Think about this, guys. Dave sends it to the AMC. They review it. There's some things they want clarifying, which happens a fair amount, right? This little thing, less with Dave, but more with other appraisers. Then it goes to Brian's group. Brian's group is going to underwrite again if they have some questions about it, which happens. Now they don't converse with the appraiser. They have to go back to the AMC and say what their challenges are. Then the AMC is going to send it to Dave again. Dave's going to make the corrections or whatever needs to be made. Then it's going to go back to the AMC for them to review again. Then it's going to go back to you guys to review again. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what you're hearing, guys, is that timing matters. So, one of the things that we used to do in the past, I don't know if people still do it, was, hey, I don't want that appraisal ordered until the inspection's done.
That happens all
Anybody
the time.
still do that? So the question is, be careful if you want to do that, right? Because how fast do you want that deal to close? Do you realize all these moving pieces that have to go there? Now,
right.
I'm going to, I know as a listing agent, a lot of times I would write, depending on how the market is and how hot the house was, I'm going to write in there that an appraisal has to be paid for and ordered within X amount of days, because I don't want it to slow down. And I actually think there's some advantages to you as a listing agent if they've already paid for that appraisal and started. So if they bail out of the deal, they're going to lose that money. It's, now again, we're talking listing agent versus selling agent, how these things are going to work. But think about that. If the market's hot and you've got a hot house, those are some of the things I'm going to write, because I don't want people to have a chance to slow down. I don't want that deal to slow down. And today I'm finding that people are trying to close fast again, right, Brian? Because they think lenders aren't as busy. But you realize all these moving pieces that if you slow that down, and again, in a transaction, the buyers hold you responsible for everything as a realtor, for the most part. So that's why it's always about picking the right recommending the right lenders matters, because it's going to be a reflection of you. They just remember you at the end. So the key is, if you try to jam a deal quickly and then slow it down with appraisal and things like that, and then the deal gets stressful at the end and it doesn't close on time, or it's really stressful, what does the buyer remember? They remember you. And it was stressful. So think about these things you're going, because you're always trying to exceed expectations.
And John, if I could just talk to the listing remarks again, think about it when you're writing a listing. Think about things that you may not want to put in that listing that might draw attention to something that maybe the lender or the appraiser doesn't need or want to know. So, for instance, like income potential or there's several factors sometimes that could influence whether the highest and best use is really residential, or are they buying this split off a lot, or if they're, if they can run a business out of it. Those things can pose issues with lending. So just think about the remarks that you're putting in your listing and read it to say, hey, if I'm an appraiser, does this throw a red flag? Because it may be something totally fine, but why go down that road and why put extra scrutiny on something that doesn't need it?
And Dave, to add on that, so I know we can look back at the history of a listing of all the changes that were made on it.
Yes.
Do you ever actually look at that stuff?
Yeah, because for the subject property, we have to go through a listing history in the appraisal. So we definitely look at it. I mean, just more or less like it was listed for this, it was lowered to this on this date, it was lowered to this, it went pending, and then it fell through, and then it was relisted, and then it went pending, and that's where we're at right now.
So this is technical, but let's just say the house was listed at 150. Don't use old numbers, but let's say the house was listed at 400 and it sold at 410 and $10,000 in concessions. I know some agents would be like, you know what? I'm going to change the list price to 410 right away and get seller's permission to do that.
Right.
Because I've thought, like, sometimes they think it's going to be easier for an appraiser to appraise at the sales price, at the list price, than it is with going over value. Do you look back? I mean, do appraisers typically look back to even see that the price was moved up? Are they looking at those details? Have you seen that happen before?
Oh, I've seen it happen. It doesn't really make much difference. It closes for what it closes for as far as a comparable sale. And the subject property, I have to analyze the contract, and so like it was listed for 400 and it sold for 410 and there's 10,000. I kind of talk about it, but it doesn't influence my value. I still have to come to value the same way. And so if it's you're jacking the price up, I hope there's comps to prove that. That's what I always. I hope it was listed a little low so that works, because, now I have to try to prove 410 instead of 400. So yeah, but no, it doesn't make a difference either way. One thing you were talking about timing of ordering appraisals. One of my business partners, Jesse, is a VA appraiser, which I am not. He said that to tell the folks that they have, when an appraisal is ordered, they have 15 days, business days. So that could be like 19 days to get the appraisal done. That's standard VA. So know that when you're ordering VA, that the appraiser is going to have 15 days to get the appraisal done. Now you can try to influence them to get it done sooner, but that's what VA doesn't. Brian maybe can speak this, but doesn't make them get it done quicker than that. If they're busy or whatever.
I think you pointed out 15 business days, a lot different than 15 calendar days.
There's no ordering a rush appraisal on VA.
So let's talk about that. So you can order a rush appraisal.
Yes.
And what's typically the extra cost to do that? And what does that mean? Is it 7 days? Is it 10 days? What does a rush mean?
Well, in our market right now, the average appraisal turn time is 5 to 7 days right now. If you want to order a rush, it depends on how much money you're willing to spend to get that appraiser to do other things and or maybe work extra hours to get it done for you faster. So again, the AMC will put it out to bid. We'll say, hey man, we need a rush on this. Maybe we can get it back in 3 days, but it's going to cost you.
So those things.
There were times when a rush was 2 weeks,
right?
Back in when we were out 4 weeks. So yeah, I mean,
right. So like right now, rushes aren't really that big a deal because 5 to 7 days. I mean, you're not going to save much time on that unless you switch lenders and things have to get done. But back when appraisals were like, oh yeah, if we can get one done, and I remember having people like, well, yeah, I send it out to the AMC and all of them are coming back. They can't get it back for 35 days. It's like, are you kidding me? And then it was like, oh, let's pay. A rush might have been a week and a half, right? And you might have been paying what, $300-400 more for that?
Well, back in the COVID days, it was ridiculous. It was, I mean, there were some that were thousands higher to try to get it right.
Dave,
And
does
they-
go ahead, Dave. I'm sorry. Does having multiple
But at that
offers
point, they were saying we had too few appraisers. The truth was is that the government pushed the interest rate down to 2.5%, and everybody and their mother refied at the same time. So that was just unnatural. That's not a natural market.
Yeah, when it took a month to get a title report as well.
Yeah.
What, Dave, do multiple offers affect the way you think? If an agent's letting you know, hey, we had 5 offers, is that
Yeah.
something you put in the appraisal, or you're going to talk about it?
Yeah, when in the contract section where we talk about it, it definitely, in my mind, we look at it and go, okay, well, more than one person thinks that this price is good, So even when you have one person that offers money, that matters, So it makes us look at this number that they're agreed to, and there's more weight to it, as opposed to a refi where there's no number, that there's no sale price. So the process is the same, but when you have a sale and you have multiple offers, it's like, in my mind, it's like, oh, okay, this is probably priced pretty good because three different buyers think so. Give that some weight.
So, guys, we're coming to the end here, and man, I just appreciate you guys of what you've done and jumping on here. Thank you so much. I've learned a bunch of things and confirmed some things. But I wondered, with a few minutes here, does anybody else have any other questions they'd like to ask? We've got about 5 minutes here, and we've had a few questions, but I didn't know if there's anybody else. If there is, just unmute yourself and ask.
Hey, John,
Hey, I had a ton of
real
questions.
Oops.
Oh, excuse me.
Sorry, Liz. I
That's
have a
okay.
real quick one, and Dave, just a quick yes or no on this one. Does rising or falling market affect your substantiation of value?
Yes, like I talked about, we have to do time adjustments based on that. And if it's falling or rising, the lender will want more current comps. They have more issues with older comps when you're in a market like that. So it affects how we do things.
Great, that's awesome. Liz.
I had a ton of questions, and this was such a great class that all of them got touched on, except for one. I was told that appraisers use something called RPR, Realtors Property Resource. Are you familiar with that, and do you use it?
It's on MLS, right? I do not use it personally.
Okay.
So I can't speak to that. I use other tools. So.
Okay, thank you.
I've heard RPR is really great. A lot of agents use. I'm not experienced with it either. Out there. Any other questions before we wrap up?
I have a question.
Yep.
So back to the concessions and stuff, when an appraiser calls me, because one of the things I tell my buyers and sellers, okay, they can raise the price 10 grand to cover their closing costs, but that means it has to appraise at that price, right? So that's putting a burden on the seller to, pay those and have to appraise, which it may or may not. So then later, when the appraiser calls me and says, I see you had a sale at 123 Main Street, blah, blah, blah. Were there any seller concessions? Why does that matter when it appraised? Like it sold for 410, it appraised at 410, obviously, because the sale went through. That's the value. What does it matter whether it was $10, $20, or $30,000 in concessions when the comps supported that value?
Great
Does that
question.
make sense?
Well, that's a great question. First of all, we don't know it appraised for that, because sometimes people putting in a big down payment and they'll pay more than it appraises for. They had more than 20% down and they just want the deal to happen. And the fact that some other appraiser said it was worth that doesn't necessarily affect me. What matters is what it closed for. And we have to consider concessions. And so in most sales, the buyer is getting, let's say it sold for 410 with 10,000, they're getting 400 for the property. And so we'll deduct the 10,000 off of that price because that's really what it sold for, is 400. Now, if we consider that concessions are typical and really are necessary, so sometimes when I do White City, sometimes when I do West Medford, almost every sale has concessions, and I will, in my appraisal, not deduct the concessions. And I will say why I didn't deduct them, because it's typical to facilitate most sales in this market. And so I'm not deducting them. So that's something we have to determine. But as a whole, they want us to deduct the concessions because the buyer is not getting that money. So it's really selling for less than that.
Okay, yeah, it's debatable because the comps had to support it at some level. But yeah, I get what you're saying. Just
I hear
seems
what you're
a little
saying.
weird to me that, that was the market value. And if a seller decided that they want to take 10 less just to help out a buyer, does it really mean that the value was less because the comps supported it?
Well, and that sometimes properties appraise way more than for what they sold for. So, we're looking at that. It sold for that. So that was market value. Maybe maybe, like we said, that could have been lower then. So that's why we have to get a bigger group of sales to look at, because otherwise we can be led astray by one individual sale. But I hear what you're saying about concessions.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Questionable how we deal with those.
Just something came to mind before we wrap up, Jeff. Brian, so let's say an appraisal comes in low and it doesn't, there's no objections to it. They can't object it. They went back now, but the buyer's putting 25% down. The seller's not willing to negotiate at all on price. What are the options a buyer has?
Well, obviously they can still close on that. We're going to base their loan to value off the lower of the purchase price of the appraised value. So instead of us closing a loan at, say, 75% loan to value, maybe we close it at 80% loan to value. And during COVID, when things were going up so fast, we were actually having conversations with our buyers about an appraisal gap strategy, because we knew values were just going up so fast. It's like, hey, look, it's possible you're going to be paying over asking price and it may not appraise. If it does, that house is probably still worth it because you've been looking for a house for 3 months. What's our appraisal gap strategy? So in other words, if it doesn't come in, are you still willing to buy it? And can we do a lower loan to value or have you bring in more cash to bridge that gap?
That's brilliant. What I love about that, guys, is us as agents, is to start talking about what's possible and setting the stage before it happens so people are more prepared and they've actually had some time to gestate on it. So if it's not obvious to them, but if you start talking about, here's some things that have happened, here's how we handle that, just want you to be aware. When you actually get to it, it's just not as big of a deal. So, hey, we're going to wrap up. I just want to thank Dave Heidegger. I want to thank Brian Case for jumping on here. I want to thank all of you that asked great questions and actually just participated, guys, and being here. We're going to have a great year. I hope you just finish out strong. We've got, about less than 2 months now. But what you do right now is going to be the difference of how your year starts. And what I can tell you is the great agents go to work right now. They're working right now because they're paying the price and they know that because they know most agents are stop working. And if they keep working, they're going to start the year out great. And I just suggest you to do that as well. So thanks, y'all.